Hey everybody, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Joining us, it is Parker Ainsworth, the host of the new Locked On Coogs podcast, covering all things Houston Cougars. We'll talk about the 2022 Houston Cougars football team, also the basketball team as well, and the expectations as Houston turns their attention towards joining the Big 12 as well, all coming up on the show.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Locked On Big 12 podcast, Josh Neighbors here, your host. Please subscribe to the channel. Please make sure you guys tap the bell for notifications. And also, please, if you are a Houston Cougars fan, subscribe to the new Locked On Cougs. That's the title, right? Locked On Cougs. Correct, Parker?
Locked On Coogs. We just got started. We're recording on Monday night, so the first episode came out this morning. we really did just get going. We're excited to get started.
We're really glad to have you. I'll tell you what, the Houston fans are an awesome and passionate bunch. Talk about your background and how you came to us here at Locked On and your connection to the Houston Cougars and what people can expect from you.
Well, I was born in Houston many moons ago at this point. It feels like further and further away each day. It's funny how that works. But I was born in Houston, and I've been a Houston sports fan my whole life. I actually, if I'm being honest, I got to play Division III football at a really small school far away, which meant that I got to continue rooting for whoever I wanted to along the way there. And then, frankly, I met some people at Locked On through old podcast kind of stuff. And then someone said, "Hey, what would your interest be in a Houston show?" And I was like, "Very, very interested. Let's continue talking." Right. And so, here we are.
We're glad too, because we have Locked On. It's funny. We have Locked On Cougs and we have Locked On Cougars, the BYU podcast. So we're halfway home on getting the still do UCF. Actually, no, we have Cincinnati too. I lied. So we're only one podcast away from fulfilling all of the new Locked On Big 12 hosts. Yeah, UCF is the only one that is still left. But we're glad to have you once again. Locked On Cougs. You guys can find that with your podcast. It's going to be joining on YouTube here pretty soon. Make sure you guys follow Parker. His Twitter handle is on here. It's at Painsworth512. So I'm sure you guys get the update there when it goes to YouTube. All right, let's talk about this Houston Cougars team. So at the start of the season, I was really optimistic about this team. I think a lot of people were. I thought with their schedule, the way it's set up, they had a chance to not be as good as Cincinnati was last year, but to have a Cincinnati type season just because the way their schedule set up. That has not happened. It has been that has not happened, Parker. It's been a frustrating season. The offense has been stop and start, occasionally good. It doesn't feel like it's as good as it should be. The defense is nowhere near what it should have been. And look, I think there is some questions about how much blame goes on Dana Holgorsen. Because look, I thought they had an excellent chance to kind of catapult themselves into the Big 12, and now they're dogfighting themselves, at 500 right now. I mean, they really should have lost that game against Memphis. What's kind of the current feeling about this season, this team?
Well, I mean, bluntly, we've already lost as many more games this year as we did all of last season. So that's never a good way to start the year. They're technically 3-3, and that is 500. And I guess you look at the whole of since 2010, that's kind of more the norm. I think what you're alluding to though is that last season they went 12-2. Mm-hmm. They played Cincinnati as well as anyone in the American Conference did. They're catapulting themselves into the Big 12. They had a pair of Big 12 opponents to start the season, Texas Tech and Kansas. I think Kansas is better than people thought they were going to be, but obviously that was supposed to be this bar measurement. You're coming off a 12-2 season, start off the season with those guys, and then hopefully have a good American season as you lead into the Big 12. You hope that's impressive enough to pull in some of your at-home recruits, maybe hit the transfer portal kind of stuff. And what's happened instead is that they have had a bunch of close games come down to execution here, execution there. I mean, 3 overtime games and then the big fourth quarter comeback against Memphis. And all of that has really been disappointing. I don't mean to be overly pessimistic, although I think people listen to me long enough will find out that I kind of can be.
I think it's there's only one way to put it, right? This is too good of a team to play this way.
Definitely. And I feel like at the end of the day, they brought back a veteran starter as veteran as college football guys can be in Clayton Tune at quarterback. And you thought another year with Holgorsen, a fifth-year starter that's had 4 years of Holgorsen. You'd think that some of that overlap would start to really blend in. You think about the high-powered Holgorsen offenses from his days of the OC at Houston many moons ago, his time at West Virginia in between, and you think of pace, and all of that, and really the offense is kind of stalled out. They lead the NCAA in all penalties. Which is atrocious because you're watching again, they're averaging 10.5 penalties a game. That's a lot. That's a lot to say.
That is a ton.
Yeah,
that is a ton. We were talking about a game. I was talking about the game yesterday. I think it was the TCU Kansas game. I think there were 6 total in the entire game between both teams. 10 a game for a single team. Oh my god!
For a single team. And frankly, you're talking about TCU Kansas, while it apparently is the cream of the crop in the Big 12 right now, that is your opponent next year, right? That is the bar you have to measure yourself at if you're Houston. And right now it's not working. I thought it was interesting a couple weeks ago, Dana Holgorsen did not take credit for, or he passed the blame off initially in the post-game presser on I don't know what you want me to do. I tell him to wait till the ball starts. Yeah. He's I'm telling him to watch the ball. And it's you can't, even if that's how you really feel as a head coach, you cannot say that. You cannot say that out loud.
It's on you. You're the coach.
Always.
So, because you look at the way these games have played out for them this season, and you mentioned the 1-score games, right? They had the triple overtime thriller against UTSA. They win by 2. They lose to Texas Tech by 3. They lose to Kansas by 18. They beat Rice by 7. They lose to Tulane by 3. They beat Memphis by 1. The only game that has not been a 1-score game for Houston this year, they lost by 18 points to Kansas in a game they were up 14-0 in. And and look, Kansas has had a penchant for falling behind and kind of getting themselves back off the mat. But that game felt over when Kansas was up 7. You could feel the momentum had completely shifted out of the sails for Houston. And it's interesting, what is left? What is up to them to see? Are they going to grind their way to 9-3? Are they going to fight their way to 6-6? Are 8-4 somewhere in between? And what does that mean for them going to the Big 12? Because if you think about it, Cincinnati's going to end up having probably a better year than Houston is at this pace. And out of the three AAC teams, you kind of feel like Houston is Cincinnati rather, while they're not in as good of a location as UCF or Houston is going to have that inside track. And you might say, well, in the playoff, sure, they should. But, I thought Houston had a real shot to kind of be the hotter team at the moment when they joined the Big 12, and it just hasn't worked out that way.
Well, and it again, a year ago, because Cincinnati had their magical run, and then they had some guys go to the pros, it kind of was paced out for that to happen to Houston. Bluntly, a lot of the Big 12 recruiting ground is in Houston. You think you can can use that to your advantage if you're Holgorsen. Right. I have to say, my take on the Kansas game, walking away from that, not knowing a lot about Kansas going in because it's Kansas football, and we'll talk about basketball later, I'm sure. I learned a lot more about Kansas in that game than I felt like I did about Houston. And if, frankly, we're sitting here at 5-1 and Kansas were the one loss, I don't know that I'd feel that bad about that on this side of it. Now, if you told me the start of the year that we'd lose to Kansas, obviously I'd feel differently. Right. The deal to me is all the close games. The ones you mentioned, a bunch of 1-score losses, and at some point it's a trend, right? A bunch of 1-score losses, a bunch of penalties. Those are all kind of the same vein. Good teams don't commit those penalties. Good teams gut out those wins. Good teams don't get to overtime. Like those kinds of things happen. And you mentioned it, there was this deflating thing when Houston scored the first 14 points, and then Kansas responds with 21, ends up being 28 before Houston does anything. And it's oh, that's the ball game. It's not quite halftime. that was it. That was all it took.
It's interesting too for them. I'm thinking about going to the next year. For one thing, the recruiting for them has to improve a little bit. Right now, I just looked at it. They're 4th in the AAC in terms of recruiting next year, and they're not in the AAC next year, right? And they're behind. I think they're behind SMU, and the teams are behind right now. I'll double check this real fast. So they're 5th. So Memphis and SMU are both ahead of them right now in terms of next year's recruiting. Now, this stuff can change, can flip. The one thing, let's talk positively. The one advantage I think Houston has, Parker, is that they are going to be joining a Power 5 conference. It's going to help them in the transfer portal, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of guys from the Houston area that will go to Texas. They will go to, and not even just Texas. They'll go to places, Missouri City. I mean, that's a place that you see a lot of kids go to places like Missouri, right? Like Arkansas, like LSU, like Florida, all different kinds of places. And you'll see those kids say, okay, I'm fighting for playing time. An injury could set me back. There's a new 5-star coming in to take my spot, whatever it is. Can I go back home, close to home? And what level can I play at there? Well, now Houston, which is, I believe, the 4th largest city in America, right? Population-wise, I believe that's the case, yes?
Correct, yeah.
That's going to offer kids a chance to go back home and play. And so maybe, I'm not sure, just they have to recruit well, sure. But I think Dana can crush the transfer portal. I think that's a future, and not just Dana, whoever's coaching. we look. Well, actually, let's do this first before we do the recruiting thing. It's Dana, right? We're not gonna pitch Dana. I know they made the comment about going 8-4, right? I know they made the Major Applewhite thing, 8-4.
Yeah. So the comment. The comment Josh alluding to is actually, many moons ago, a while back at this point, right. It was the president of the university, who was still the president of the university, said that the goal was to be good enough of a program where you would fire coaches for going 8-4. Right. And that looked really bad when Houston was sitting at 2-3, and that just extended Dana Holgorsen. They owe him, so a buyout at January 1st would be like $9.5 million, which is not a lot of Big 12 money, but is a lot of AAC money. And so if he is not bowl eligible, or if they have a disappointing, 7-5 or whatever, we'll kind of see like how much tempting of fate do they do. Are they really going into Big 12 with that $9.5 million buyout and go get somebody bigger name? Matt Rule just won the market today, right? Like, or do they say like, no, Dana's the guy. He coached West Virginia. He knows the conference. Give him a chance to the transfer portal and those kinds of things. I will say you're alluding to what I think the biggest benefit to Houston though is, and it's the greater Houston area high school football. It's one of the greatest hotbeds of high school football in America to this point. It's been not in the Power 5 backyard. It's going to be obviously very, very soon. And kids transferring back home, or just bluntly like guys not wanting to leave home later. It's frankly, you mentioned SMU is ahead of Houston in the AAC rankings right now. And that's because they're keeping Dallas kids in Dallas in a way that I think is interesting. Right. Houston can do the exact same thing with Big 12 caliber kids, and frankly, really flip this thing around fast. Like it does. We've seen the way the transfer portal works in modern college football. It doesn't have to take a long time.
No, it does not have to take a long time at all. I believe they've already picked up one transfer from Texas. Jalen Garth, I think, is one of the guys that they're supposed to be getting in next season. But that's the one thing I think I was hoping for with a big season for them, is that a big season for them would put them on the map. Potentially New Year's Six Bowl would help them capitalize off that and say, here we come. We're in the Big 12. Because for so long, this, Houston's really wanted that seat at the table, right? Mm-hmm. They've wanted the same way SMU has. I mean, SMU's wanted that the same way TCU wanted it. Mm-hmm. And they wanted that seat at the table. And out of those three schools, TCU got one with the Big 12. And GP has a lot to do with that and how well he did for a long time. That Rose Bowl, I mean, talk about iconic moments, with for G5 teams, we have the iconic moment of Boise State against Oklahoma. I guess Utah back, way back when, with them against Alabama. And then also, you go ahead and you think about the one that TCU had against Wisconsin. I mean, this was kind of their chance to get there. Now they're going Power 5 without that, but I think a season like that could expedite the process. Cincinnati, for example, I mean, that's an established power now. Mm-hmm. And look, you're not the number one dog in the state of Ohio. Ohio State is short.
Right.
Michigan coming there to recruit. Penn State, we know, kills it in that area of the country as well. But like, if you're 3 or 4 star and you go play for that coach, they put 9 guys in the draft. They had the third most draft picks of any school in America. And tell you what, those kids look pretty good in the league right now. A lot of
Sauce Gardner, great,
unbelievable. So I thought Houston had that chance. Now maybe they get there. I think just this season might expedite. stop the expedition of the process. It might be slower now because I thought this was a golden opportunity. I mean, maybe I'm looking into it too much about one season, but I thought this was a really good chance, and they're kind of squandering it, I feel like.
Well, and obviously, you're segueing me somewhat well into like later this week. We're going to talk about like, can they realistically make a bowl game and those kinds of things. We'll look at the rest of the schedule, but
yes, they can make
we
a
have a
bowl
bye
game.
week.
Come
right?
on,
Let's
go
game. Let's
to a bowl game.
It's a bye week. We got to have something. But what I think is interesting is obviously missing a bowl game would probably be a nail in the coffin for Dana, because we can joke about 8-4, but 5-7. You can't leave the AAC. Yeah, like we can actually have the $9.5 million conversation all of a sudden. I think the interesting thing will be with Texas going to the SEC, Oklahoma going to the SEC. Big 12 caliber kids in Texas may end up at Houston or Baylor, TCU, etc. Out of just because SEC kids and Big 12 kids, certainly lineman type kids, have tended to look different for whatever reason. And A&M and LSU have kind of gotten the SEC type kids, and Texas and Oklahoma have gotten the Big 12 type kids. Well, now is Houston going to get some of the Big 12 type kids? And that's not to say that neither Texas or Oklahoma has put out pro linemen by any stretch, but certainly the line, like when you're visually watching a game like TCU, Kansas, and then flip the channel over to Cincinnati or flip the channel over to Houston, the guys up front in the trenches are almost more look more different than like Houston's got Tank down the outside, Tajon Henry in the back. He's hurt right now, but Tajon, they've got Big 12 speed. It's the linemen, the big bodies, that the big fellas ugly guys lean on each other. It's just not quite the same in your group of 5 conferences. And if you can get those guys, maybe it looks different. But I would hope for a fast transfer portal. But if we can't hit the transfer portal, I think we're looking at a little bit longer deal.
Well, that stuff, I mean, that is always the ultimate decider, right? People love talk about skill, exciting. And Nathaniel Dell's an awesome player, and Tyson Henry's another guy. And the learning back, McCaskill got hurt too. Like these are all Power 5 level caliber skill guys. But what makes the difference, like you said, is the guys up front. I mean, we saw it last week when Oklahoma played Texas. Like one team had some guys up front and the other team didn't. And Oklahoma got pushed around up front. And that stuff will fluctuate for those two schools. But last year, Baylor, why was Baylor so good? They push folks around up front. Mm-hmm. That's what Oklahoma State did too, especially on the defensive side of things. And like that, I'll never forget. I went to the 2019 Peach Bowl between Oklahoma and LSU. It looked like one team was an NFL team, one team wasn't. Mm-hmm. It was like Joe Burrow was amazing, the offense amazing, but it looked like the Oklahoma defensive linemen run into a brick wall. And you're so right about that. And that's going to be a big decider. And I do think for football, BYU and who I think is really good, Houston. I think Cincinnati's transition is probably going to be the easiest, to be honest.
Coming off a college football playoff season, I guess there'll be a season removed when they join next year, but it's certainly you can feed off that, I think. Right.
I know BYU has grown men, but we're seeing it this year. It's just not. They beat Baylor. Baylor's good, but it wasn't this some crazy, awesome, convincing victory. Oh my god, because they got pushed around by Oregon the next week, right? So I think there is going to be that transition period for these schools. Like we saw, I mean, Texas Tech is a middle-of-the-road a Big 12 team this year, right? And they were able to fight back and win that game and kind of push them around. Kansas went down early too, fought back, pushed Houston around some there. So I went from feeling a lot more confident about the Houston transition. Once again, I'm not saying it's going to be bad because they're in such a great spot, right? You geographically transitioning to the Big 12 conference, which has a ton of Texas teams. You couldn't ask for a better place to be. I just think the timing it might be longer than I thought. So
well, and it's just interesting because had they done this whole thing a year ago, it'd be like, oh man, they're coming off a 12-2 season, jumping to the Big 12, or the year before that when they had some NFL guys on the team last year, right? And then like that, it's just the luck of the draw and those kinds of things. I hope it comes back around. Houston has had great teams, and frankly, like when they get the Ed Olivers of the world, like Greg Ward's of the world, like guys from Houston to stay. Suddenly they're really good, right? And I think that's the long-term hope. We got to see how fast it happens.
Right. Let's talk about the overall joining the Big 12. Fans still psyched? Fans still pumped up?
Yeah, and I think that especially with the football season going south relatively early, the big move has been basketball. Basketball, I mean, Houston's in the top 5 or 10, if not 1 in a couple polls across the country. Houston basketball is really, really strong right now. And bluntly, to join the Big 12, you kind of have to be, right? In 2019, you had Texas Tech, replay away in overtime for winning the national championship. 2020, there's no title. 2021, Baylor runs away.
I'll tell you what, the 2020 Kansas, that team, that team was, in my opinion, going to win that thing. So
2021, you have Baylor, and then 2022, you do have Kansas, right? So, just being in the top 10 kind of makes you a normal Big 12 team. It's a basketball strong. We all think of the Texas high school football and the Oklahoma, Texas of the world, but we mentioned all of those basketball teams. Cade Cunningham came through the conference, right? Like this is a strong basketball conference, and Houston has every right to feel really good about themselves in basketball. They brought back Marcus Sasser. He was a projected first-round pick who came back for his second year at Houston this year. Miraculously, we're glad to have him back. And they bring in a couple five-star forwards. And they're looking strong in basketball. And frankly, if you look at who's the conference going to be when they sign up, when they move into the Big 12, it's going to be Baylor's got a big program. Kansas State weirdly has a one-off every now and then. It is going to be a strong.
Kansas State, made the Elite Eight a few years ago.
Yeah,
honestly,
exactly.
I thought their team last year they would have made a tournament in a different conference. But I do let's do the basketball thing, because I look at BYU, look at Cincinnati, look at UCF. It's gonna be rough. I watched the way Houston plays with the physicality. They're the one team that's just going to assimilate in this league. I'll tell you what, it's a fist fight. It is a fist fight every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in this league. I mean, when you're playing at Tech, and then you're at Gallagher-Iba, and then you're home for Kansas, and then you're home for Kansas State, and then you're going to Iowa State, right? There are literally no nights off. Much actually like football is this year. You look at the Big 12 last year, somebody has to eat the losses. I don't think it's going to be Houston, though, because one thing they've had the last couple of years, you mentioned, Quentin Grimes, good example of this. Guy Marcus Sasser, good example. They've got a lot of skill at those guard positions, and they make, some of those rebounding performances in the tournament, oh my God, they kick the shit out of you on the glass. They will absolutely, but they will. And that's one thing I'll tell you what, that'll transition to Big 12. They'll get a lot of appreciation from other coaches. They're also going to cause a lot of headaches for a lot of the coaches in this league, man, with the way they rebound the basketball. I think that's the one thing they do so well, that if Kelvin Sampson keeps that going, they'll fit right into this league, and not just to the top of the league. And
Kelvin Sampson gets that his days at Oklahoma, right? And then he got in trouble for sending too many text messages, allegedly, right? But he sends too many text messages, but before that, he was kind of putting Oklahoma. They had the Hollis Price years, the Blake Griffin years. But he healed from it. They were very good before he got in all that trouble. And so there's no reason. Again, you talk about the city of Houston as your backyard recruiting ground. One of their five-star recruits, Terrence Arsenault, is from Beaumont United. That's 30-40 minutes away. That is right down the road. And that is the kind of program he's building. And what I love about the stuff I'm watching on Sampson's stuff, in the preseason, all these practices and camps, and he's on pressers every day. And his biggest thing is we're not looking at anyone that they're not looking at. They play Oregon. They play all these they're not looking at other teams, right? It is all watching our tape, our drills, we're going to just get better every day and see what happens. And that's so refreshing just to see at this point in the season, because it'd be so easy to look at the hype and be so easy to feel that pressure. No, we're just watching tape. We're just going to get better and let the chips fall where they may, because we know we're confident. We're pretty good at basketball.
Well, think about that. Folks who don't understand what we're saying here, what's being said about this is basically, we think we're at a point now personnel-wise where if we play the best version of Houston basketball, we're pretty confident we're going to be there at the end of the year. And look, you go to the Final Four and they play Baylor. That Baylor team is – I don't think people understand how good that Baylor team was. I really don't think people understand, when you're oh my God, Davion Mitchell, oh my God, Jared Butler, oh my God, Maceo Teague. They really would just isolate you and they were on fire in that game.
Well, and Davion Mitchell was playing out of his mind that whole time. Bluntly, Houston played them as well as Gonzaga did in the final.
It's true, right? That is true. It's just that the scoring was a bit more, it was a bit more unbalanced the way it happened. But that team was amazing. And then last year, I'm trying to remember who ended up getting Houston last year.
Was it
in 2021? Did they play Kansas and lose to Kansas?
I'm pulling it back up because I'm so focused on 2023, if I'm being honest. Because 2023, the Final Four is in Houston, so like that's.
Oh, is it actually?
It's at NRG, and so anyway, that's a ton of fun. They lost to I got Baylor in the Elite Eight, or in the Sweet 16 last year. But the Final Four being in Houston has not been overlooked by the University of Houston. NRG would be you want to talk about a lot of red and white around the stadium.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see them, people come out of the Fertitta Center and pack that place because look, I think that's the one nice thing about this that will be exciting. I mean, you're going to see Big 12 arenas full when Houston comes to town, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, when UCF comes to town, they'll be like, oh, it's cool. They're coming to town. But like people in this league, the basketball fans in this league are some of the smartest you'll find. Look, it's the best basketball conference in the country. All right. Texas Tech. Love Joey McGuire. Love the football there. That's a basketball school. I don't care what you see what they did last year when Chris Beard came back. Oh my God, those people love their basketball. It's in part to a lot of what he did there. But that place is damn near a basketball school now. Baylor
and
tremendous,
and it's continued as a But the impressive thing about Tech, was just that they've continued to be a basketball school after Beard left. Like it's not. It's still rolling. It's just still rolling.
Yeah. And they were so close with Duke at the end of the year. And it was, and they're going to have another good season probably once again. But I'll tell you this, like I am fired up to see them. As fun as it is, and I think as many question marks as I have about them for football, the Houston Cougars for basketball are going to be like, it's peanut butter and jelly for them coming in this league. I'm so excited. And I'll tell you what, the one nice thing about basketball, football is great. We love it. That stuff only happens once a week, 12 weeks a year, right? And 13 for some teams. They do the basketball thing, man. We get rolling during basketball, and I know Houston's going to realize this, and they'll probably take a few more losses. But like once you hit that schedule, man, like at Tech, we'll lose Texas, but maybe for a year, at Texas, then home for Kansas State and home for KU, then at Baylor, and then at Iowa State. I mean, the places you will go in this league, the crowds you will see, and I'm fired up for Houston to be a part of that. And I think the basketball, I mean, we all can't wait for it.
It's been a ton of fun. I'm really looking for it to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right, Parker, one more time. Let the folks know where they can find you. Where can they find your work and all of its variety, not just Locked On stuff. If you got anything else you want to promote, please do so now.
I write a little bit on the side, and I tweet probably way too much. But you can find me, all my social media stuff's at Painsworth512, Painsworth 512. We'll be posting every episode of Locked On Coogs from there for a while and getting things started. And we're still in the early stage of Locked On Coogs. Again, it just started this week. But you can find Locked On Coogs wherever you get your podcasts, any audio platform right now. We're live on all those. We have the first episode. I probably talked too long about introducing myself. Then we get into talking about last week's football game. So make sure you go check that out.
One more thing for you. Will a mysterious Jalen Green injury happen this year so we can go for Wembanyama? Is that the plan?
Perhaps. What I think is funny is a lot of people that are like, they're pulling Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. off the floor at the same time. I'm like, yeah, that's on purpose. That's that's a feature, not a bug, right? That's exactly.
Yep. That's gonna happen. We don't want too many good players in the court at once. Or, we can't stagger the good players, right? We either on or off. We might keep them off for a bit longer than we should. But no, they're very excited for the NBA season as well. And look, we'll have some NBA prospects coming up the Big 12 too. All right, man. Parker Ainsworth, the host of the new Locked On Cougs podcast. It was a pleasure talking to you. Look forward to many more of these conversations, my friend.
Thanks for having me on.